Coffee and Brighthope, you have such an uplifting surname.
Thank you. The patients used to like it. The patients I said, "Well, I feel better already."
Look, let's go back a few years. I mean, we're coming to the end of 2025, and many would say, but the COVID narrative, that doesn't matter anymore. I would disagree. I would say that it's still a very, very important issue because it's become a placeholder for a lot of other talking points. But if we go back to 2019, just before everything started, would you go back there, or do you prefer where we are now?
Look, I'm happy to go back to pre-AIDS days because this whole business of medicine, healthcare, viruses, etc., goes back a long time. And my experience was very different as an undergraduate medical student. I took a completely different view of medicine, and I knew what was going on, or I had an idea about what was going on back in the late 1960s and early 1970s with regard to the training of doctors, because I trained in agricultural science before I did medicine, and I did research in animal nutrition. And studying medicine, the first 3 years of pure science was fantastic. But then the clinical years, the science went out the door. I mean, I couldn't understand why people were being diagnosed with depression or manic depression or bipolar disease or schizophrenia when they looked so unhealthy physically. Couldn't understand what heart failure was when basically it's retention of fluid, and using diuretics and drugs to slow the heart down. A lot of things just didn't make sense to me. And then when I was doing oncology as an undergraduate, I asked the prof about the patient in the bed, who was an old lady with cancer and being fed salt and sugar through her veins and jelly and ice cream for a dinner. And I've said this story many times. I just couldn't believe if she was an animal, especially an animal worth any money, we'd be pumping her full of amino acids and vitamins and minerals. But she was being starved to death as far as I was concerned. And I said, I can't be a doctor like this. I'm not going to be a doctor like that. And so I started travelling around the world looking at alternative healthcare systems and medical systems, and came to the conclusion that it was all wrong. I learned about allergy, I learned about food allergy, chemical sensitivities, all of these things that we weren't taught about in medical school. So I adopted an approach to natural therapists and chiropractors, homeopaths, traditional Chinese medicine, and it was a great awakening that we were completely blindfolded and brainwashed as undergraduate students. And this is going back into the late 1960s, early 1970s, Jeremy.
But, sorry, I'm jumping in here, but it's interesting that you say this. A few of my guests have said the same thing as you have. And if you had asked me a few years ago to say something positive about natural medicine or whatever, I would have, laughed it off. Of course, that's all changed, and I now see a lot of that stuff as ahead of the curve. But why you? Why did you pick up on something that your peers didn't?
Well, I still see my peers from my year when we graduated in 1974 every few months. They're still not really awake to what's been going on. They're older guys. I mean, they're not as old as I am, but they're in their mid-70s, and they still don't realise that they've been conned. Even coming through COVID, they all took the jabs. They're all suffering from the jabs. They're all unwell. And, of course, they're retired now. They've seen their colleagues die, get sick from the jabs, but they can't join the dots, or they won't accept it. It's a willful...
Why, though? That's what I'm asking. Why? Why are some of us able to do that and others not, do you think?
Well, I think going through medicine and doing all of the things from surgery to psychiatry, acute interventive medicine, all of this, you start to see people who ask questions. Some ask the right questions. Some ask the wrong questions and get themselves into trouble. And I think it's asking the wrong questions which is most important. The wrong questions of the wrong people at the right time. And I was really, in my undergraduate years, laughed at for my ideas, but I still, passed and did the usual orthodox training in all of the areas. And I loved intensive care. I loved acute medicine, cardiology, anaesthetics, did it all. But there was always something missing and patients not getting better. And so during the travels, I came back to Australia after starting immunology in Canada, and the immunology was basically all laboratory work with very little in the way of seeing patients getting better. And I decided that I would go into allergy. That took me into food allergy. That took me into people suffering from deficiencies. It took me into patients into hospital, finding out what they were reacting to. It took me into looking at diabetics, for example, and people with type 2, even type 1 diabetes on insulin, putting them into hospital, fasting them, cleaning out their bowel from all of the rubbish. And this is going back into the 1970s, before anybody ever spoke about the microbiome. I was giving them powdered probiotics back then, and I was being accused of trying to kill my patients with bacteria. I was accused of trying to kill my patients with high doses of intravenous vitamin C, accused of a lot of things. And the patients were getting better. We were reversing a lot of these diseases. Psychiatric patients would get better. We now know that you can give us psychiatric patients a fecal transplant, and they may even throw their drugs away. So we've learned a lot, and we're learning a heck of a lot since COVID because of a different mindset amongst my colleagues, even excuse me, even my colleagues in oncology and intensive care are starting to look at what's been happening with COVID, the virus, and the vaccines, and in particular those who were dying in intensive care and surviving if they were given repurposed drugs like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. But we did a study. We've been using vitamin C, D, and zinc for 51 years since I graduated, and recommending it during every winter, whenever there's a pandemic, an epidemic, so-called, of influenza, and patients who had high levels of vitamin D and C and zinc in their systems may have got the virus, but they never got seriously ill. Most of them never even got symptoms. And this is, people think, it's magic. It's not when you understand what these nutrients do to the immune system. Why me? Well, I was, I guess, and still am, a bit of a rebel thinker.
Yes, that's the pattern.
Yeah. I've got a fire in my belly still, and I don't know when it's going to go out, mate. When does
God bless you. Yeah, God bless you for that, because we need more people like you. But I mean, you mentioned earlier going back to before the AIDS thing. Why then?
Well, I was dissatisfied with what I learned. So I started practicing, and I looked at all of the literature around.
But hold on, sorry. I'm jumping in. When you say you were dissatisfied with what you learned, what does that mean?
Well, it means that what I learned was not enough. We did 4 hours of nutrition in a 6-year medical course. And that 4 hours is basically just telling us what proteins, fats, carbohydrates were, and that vitamins and minerals were just part of our food intake. I did more when I studied agricultural science. I learned more about, for example, take trace element like selenium, for example. Selenium deficiencies, and we did a project on selenium deficiency producing white muscle disease in cattle and sheep. Now, white muscle disease results in white muscles, white meat, which is valuable in restaurants that want white meat for you. But the animals end up with cardiomyopathies, huge hearts. And we talk about idiopathic cardiomyopathy in medicine. Idiopathic meaning we don't know what the cause of it is. And I'm being facetious, and sometimes idiopathic means pathology for idiots. But it's unknown cause. And when you see patients with cardiomyopathy and a selenium deficiency, and you supplement them with selenium and other cardiac nutrients, they can come down or off their anti-heart failure medication. And I've saved at least 2 out of 3 patients who are on the cardiac transplant list for a heart transplant. And I pay due recognition to your brilliant surgeon in South Africa, Christian Barnard, who was the first to do a successful heart transplant. But we don't need to do that, Jeremy. We can prevent that. We can improve patients' well-being and health if we had a better wellness and healthcare system.
Ian, diet and nutrition is something that I'm very interested in. I could talk about it every day. And I don't know what your position is. I'm quite good friends with sports scientist Prof. Tim Noakes. And he is very passionate about getting our nutritional intake right. And so he argues very much about sort of low carbohydrate diets, and he's very big on sort of diabetes and insulin being, these are important things to look at. Do you generally consider diet and nutrition as sort of foundational to well-being?
It absolutely is, Jeremy, absolutely fundamental. If we don't get the basic building blocks right, the biochemistry of the system, whether it be the biochemistry of the genes, the chromosomes, the division of cells, the oxygenation of tissues, the operation of the mitochondria, the respirations, the heartbeat, the functioning of the central nervous system, the transmission of impulses from brain to from nerve to muscle, etc. None of them work very well at all. So we've got to get the basic building blocks right. And you're quite right. Nutrition is absolutely 100% essential. That's why we started the College of Nutritional Medicine, and we added on to that the College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine, which has been going for 45 years in this country now, training doctors in the areas of integrative medicine, integrating into mainstream medicine. The zones, the blue zones around the world where people live the longest, the diets are so similar and so critical and provide all the basic serious nutrients for their well-being. That's also family and social connectivity is very, very important. And so is movement, not stupid exercise, but movement, and simple movements like Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, walking, all of this, working in the garden, doing housework, activity is all very important. And the emphasis is on family as well. And I think we miss out on this in Western society, industrialised societies to some extent, and we've got to try and bring it back. But if you have a deficiency of iron, for example, and you don't have anemia as a result, but just a deficiency of iron, you can feel tired. And if you feel tired and you want to achieve something, and you've got to achieve something, it creates an anxiety. And if that becomes a chronic anxiety, that iron deficiency can result in a depression. I'm simplifying it as much as I possibly can. But single nutrient deficiencies and single nutrient studies are very, very important to take cognizance of. But once you've got one deficiency, it doesn't take long before you develop other deficiencies and or stressors on your body's biochemistry. Snowballs, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're talking now about autism in the US, and they're blaming paracetamol for it, acetaminophen. Well, it does play a role. Acetaminophen is toxic to the liver. It's toxic to the baby, and we know that mothers who've consumed too much paracetamol during pregnancy can end up with children who are highly allergic and with asthma, etc., but also autism. But now, when you're looking at what the causes of autism are, I don't mind saying that I'm a very, very ardent anti-vaxxer because I don't think we need vaccines at all. And I hope you don't mind me saying that on your show.
No, I'm the same.
Okay. And there's good reason for it. The first day of life, most infants in this country receive an injection of aluminium, and aluminium is highly toxic to the central nervous system. And no matter how much the chemists and the physicians argue that it's below a certain level, it doesn't take too many millions of molecules in one shot to actually have an adverse effect on a few neurons. And you have an adverse effect on a few neurons, and that is a snowball effect as well. So,
well, I mean, sorry for jumping in, but for what it's worth, when my son was born, my wife attempted a home birth, and it became, there were a few complications, so we ended up going to the hospital. But I told them he gets no injections, nothing, not even vitamin K, and he is super healthy today.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how old you are, but you look pretty young to me. I think you're one of out of the box still regarding the generations. More and more people are waking up to this. I mean, the same with my children. They were born in the early 1990s, and I had them fairly late in life. They are both extremely healthy. They've never needed antibiotics. They've never had an injection of a vaccine, and they are. Well, my son was an elite athlete, and my daughter is just so fit and healthy. You know, these are the children who don't go to the hospital and the doctors. The over-vaccinated kids that are the sickest in Western societies.
Something that doesn't make sense to me, Ian, is if you just take a moment, just think about it for a second, right? How have humans survived for however long, right? Tens of thousands of years, whatever. And only in the last 200 years have they needed an injection that's intramuscular in the arm for improved health. It doesn't make any sense.
No, Jeremy, it doesn't make any sense to those of us who ask the right questions. In fact, we don't need most of the drugs that we use. You know, we have developed to an extent where we are so clever that we can actually create genes, artificial genes, and inject them into living beings that have never, ever been exposed to these genes and proteins before. And we have a serious problem with that. But in nature, we could die from malnutrition, we could die from an infection, we could die from an animal attacking us, or we could die in war. You know, the four dreaded horsemen of the apocalypse come along: famine, pestilence, hunger, and death, of course. But the Grim Reaper is always going to be there for us. We can delay our delivery to the Grim Reaper by living a wholesome life, staying away from drugs, just eating foods that are unprocessed. If you see something in a packet, tin, can or bottle, it's been processed. If you can identify the food, then that's the food that you should be eating. And if you can identify its provenance, then you know where it's come from, you know whether it's been adulterated in any way. And that's where we should be heading, and that's where I'm trying to, with our education programs here, teach our doctors and our nurses and the public through our various organisations in Australia to adopt a more wholesome, healthy, holistic lifestyle. And there's a big swing towards that. I hope we can achieve that, and the digital identity and CBDCs don't come and destroy everything that man has evolved with, because you and I'm sure your viewers will be appreciative of the digital ID and the CBDCs and the trap and the prison that will put us all into. And we will only be getting food that they, who are controlling us, want us to have, and the fuel, the ability to travel, etc. And we will be injected with vaccines, so-called vaccines, as frequently as they believe it's necessary. So I've been anti-pharma, big pharma, all my life, and I employed, when I had clinics and manufacturing, various natural remedies a long time ago. I employed people from big pharma who told me, these are marketing people from big pharma who told me what they do. You know, so from a vaccine company, a very well-known Australian vaccine manufacturer, putting out a vaccine that they knew didn't work, that they knew would cause adverse reactions, that they knew would make children sick. Another group of three big pharma companies came together to can the whole idea of a naturally occurring antidepressant when St John's wort was shown to be very effective against mild, moderate and severe depression. They came out with a campaign because the three companies manufactured different antidepressants. They didn't want the natural antidepressant to succeed. You know, I gave high doses of intravenous vitamin C to seriously ill patients with viral and bacterial infections. And then with the advent of the HIV virus, I was giving it to the AIDS patients, some coming to me from Europe, some coming to me from the US for treatment. And when I wrote a book about it and had it endorsed by Dr. Linus Pauling, the promoter of vitamin C, I ended up being before the medical board to be struck off, and an appeal to the Supreme Court here in Victoria was successful, and I won my case, which meant after that, what I was doing, I was basically cleared of. And we created a safe environment for doctors for a couple of decades to practice integrative nutritional and environmental medicine. But with COVID, all the doctors were made so fearful of saying anything, not allowed to give it full and free and informed consent to patients about this toxic injection that they're all meant to give, and they're still fearful. Although with some of the conferences that we're having now, I get up and tell them, you be bold, you be courageous, you practice what you think is good scientific medicine and healthcare, and stand up against the authorities. And to some extent, that's happening here in Australia, which is good, Jeremy, because it's badly needed.
If I were to ask you to give me your shtick, give me your model of health and well-being in a way that's easily digestible, what would it be?
And you have come to see me as a patient. I ask you a couple of questions. Do you want to get better? Do you want to stay well? Do you want to live a long and healthy life? And if you answer yes to all of that, then I take you through a journey of what you do need to consider. And the first thing you need to consider is what's going on up here. It's so important what's going on up here. And I say, you create yourself 10 affirmations and repeat those affirmations out loud to yourself every day. And while you're doing that, just make some changes, slight changes to your diet, and take a few supplements. If you're feeling unwell for whatever reason, we'll work out what the unwellness is, whether it's cancer or heart disease or whatever. But what I want you to do is to drink more clean water, eat unprocessed food, no sugar, white flour products, alcohol, reduce tea, coffee, chocolate's okay. Try to determine what you're reacting to in terms of foods. More than likely it's going to be peanuts, dairy products, gluten-containing grains like wheat, barley, rye and oats, and minimise those as much as possible. you're going to be deficient in vitamin C because all humans are deficient in vitamin C. So I'm going to put you on oral vitamin C to start with. The stress that you've been under, and most people have been under stress, means you're going to leach out your water-soluble vitamins and some of your minerals like zinc and magnesium. So I want you to take a few supplements. And more than likely, living in Western society, you're going to be exposed to antibiotics in your food, especially meats. So I'm going to assume that your gut is not as healthy as it should be, so I'd like you to take some probiotics and some prebiotics. Here are the prebiotic foods, and here are the probiotic foods. And because you've got gut problems, I think you need to take a probiotic supplement before meals. That's all I would do. And say, now, the other thing is basically you're not doing any exercise. I want you to touch your toes, do some sit-ups, only a few every day. Don't wear yourself out. Go for a half an hour walk, go for a half a minute walk, whatever you can do. If you can't walk for any more than 2 minutes, then walk for 1.5. But put that into practice. And if you've never done anything before in your life in terms of exercise, when you wake up in the morning, touch your toes once or just do one push-up. And that means you've succeeded in breaking that habit. Then the next morning, do 2. Next morning, do 3. So individuality is a crucial factor when you're looking after people, Jeremy, and all of what I've been saying may be appropriate, may not be appropriate to the patient. Individuality is an absolutely critical factor in nutrition too. You know, we are what we eat to some extent, but what is one man's meat is another man's poison. So I might be able to eat eggs and I don't have a problem, but Joe down the road has eggs and he feels depressed. You know, this is what individuality is all about.
Ian, I've said this a number of times on my show, and I've even said this to Tim Noakes, and he, like you, recommends supplements. Now, I've got a love-hate relationship with them, mainly because they're supplements, which suggests that they're taken as an accessory, which means that you should first sort out your primary nutrition. I'm trying to think how to ask the question. Is resorting to supplements right off the bat, not putting the cart before the horse, should we not be first looking at our primary food?
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And that's what I do at the first consultation with people. Patients want to start feeling better. And one of the ways that I discovered, I don't prescribe supplements for everybody, but for those who really want to feel better quickly, I will suggest supplements. For those who are really weak and tired and run down and recurrent infections and so on, I'll give them some intramuscular injections. For those, for example, a 21-year-old female comes in with severe adult chickenpox. Now, she came in at night time, said, you've got to go to hospital. You are in a serious condition. You can hardly breathe, and you can hardly swallow your own mucus. But I said, I'll give you something to get you on the way. I gave her some intravenous vitamin C, a big dose, an intramuscular injection of vitamin B to lift up her energy levels. And I said, off to hospital. The next morning, that was about 9 o'clock at night. The next morning, I was in the clinic and I saw her walking up the driveway. She was eating, she was drinking. The pox had all dried up, no new pox, but they're all over her body and down her trachea and esophagus. Now, that's an acute situation where if I said to her, you've got to go and change your diet and exercise, it was inappropriate management. So we have to have strategic management plans for everybody so that they know once that they've got a plan that they can look after themselves, responsibility for yourself, which is what you and I'm sure many of your viewers do. But the systems that we've got now have failed, and they've failed because basically we rely on synthetic chemicals for healthcare.
And there's too much bad stuff in our soil, etc., etc.
Yeah. And that's why sometimes the nutrients that are required for our liver to detoxify, and the liver is the big organ for detoxification. We've got two phases in the liver, and they both require nutrients, and we often don't get enough of those particular vitamins and minerals in our diet to get the liver moving again. So, the judicious use of supplementation is critical. With, in Australia, I'm sure in South Africa as well, the farmers have to put out salt licks, and we supplement the animals' diets during high productivity times. We supplement their diets during mating times to improve breeding programs. So it's a biological necessity if we're going to optimise the health, well-being of humans and the health, well-being and productivity of our livestock.
When you talk about vaccines, does the principle apply to animals also?
Yes, it does. We make the animals sick by giving them vaccines, and they've got their own routine vaccines as well. But I can, let me say that I think the childhood vaccine schedules are responsible for most of the allergies that we're seeing in children, the hay fever, the asthma, the eczema, the psychological problems, the ADHD, the autism. I'm sure it's contributing to the increased incidence of childhood diabetes, to childhood rheumatoid arthritis or Still's disease, and also contributing to childhood leukemias. And leukemia is a very interesting picture because it's regarded as a blood cancer. But in my experience with some patients with leukemia, you find that they are completely devoid of vitamin C. Their white blood cells don't have a skerrick of vitamin C. And if you treat them with vitamin C and the cofactors, you can actually reverse the leukemia.
I was asking about animals because it's a question that's come up a number of times over the years when we talk about vaccines and rejecting vaccines because they don't seem to have any positive, they don't seem to have any net benefit. And I often look at the animal kingdom as a kind of guide because animals live in a way that in many ways we should mimic because they're a lot more natural. And it appears to me, Ian, that vaccines make no net benefit either to animals, and in many ways antibiotics also.
Well, we know that we can, with antibiotics, we can actually change the flora of the gut and pump carbohydrate and other nutrients and hormones into animals and make them grow faster. And when you put them under that sort of stress, you need the antibiotics because they are under so much stress that they're more likely to get bacterial and viral infections. I'll go back to back to the early 1960s, 1963, and I went and started agriculture. And at one of the properties, they had pigs, a pig farm, and it was a very, very well-established pig farm. And they grew pigs. Young pigs can get pneumonias and gastroenteritis, and that's a risk because you've got them in such small enclosures and over populated enclosures and the possibility of infection and dirt and so forth. What they did was an experiment that it was called the high-power pig, which was the high-power stood for hysterectomy produced and artificially reared. So the sow was sacrificed and the piglets taken and artificially reared with various milks of sort. These piglets were brought up in a sterile environment. They could not go into an outdoor environment and survive, but they were brought into a sterile environment and they required very high levels of nutrients for their immune systems to function well. That's a completely unnatural situation. And it reminds me of what we're doing with human beings. We don't sacrifice the mother with human beings, but we bring them up in a highly sterile environment, a completely unnatural environment. And if there's some dirt around, it's cleaned up. And if the kids get dirty, well, the kids don't go out anymore and play with hay and soil and animals as much as you would do on a farm. And our rural kids, the kids that growing up in rural areas, are generally healthier than those who live in cities. We're living in cities and we're cramming people into suburbs now that are almost going to be future slums. Beautiful suburbs in Melbourne, where I live, being overcrowded, but because of the political arena and the need to hoard people into 15-minute cities. I mean, I'm going off the track here, but we are living in very unnatural environments, and animals, you see that they wander from place to place. They may suffer from time to time from a lack of food, but most of the time animals have survived in the wild. And if you know how the apes live, it's almost like nirvana. The great apes, basically, they're vegetarian. And I'm not saying that they're high carbs, because they do have a lot of foods that are balanced in terms of the protein intake. But we humans have developed a massive brain. It requires so much glucose, so much fuel, that we evolved away from the ability to produce vitamin C. And vitamin C is manufactured in the liver of nearly all animals apart from the human and the higher apes. It's manufactured. It's very important, yeah. I think the closer we can go to living more naturally as a community with wholesome, unprocessed foods that are not being treated with chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, from soils that are nourished organically with humus and with sort of compost, returning to the soil the nutrients that we need. And the soil is a critical factor in terms of our health and our reproductive abilities and our mental health. There was a book written called From Soil to Psyche. Very interesting book about what's in the soil can end up in the brain, can end up in the psyche.
You apologize now for quote unquote going off in a different direction. I take great offense to that. Please go off in as many directions as you want. Okay. I quite enjoy that. Okay. But
all right, I'll go off a track now. We came out of the jungle. We went into the fields. We became hunter-gatherers. Then we decided we'd start growing things, keeping animals. And then we decided we would milk the animals. We'd drink milk, which was very healthy for us. We found some seeds, and we started planting seeds. And we found that some seeds were durable and lasted many, many seasons. And these were seeds like wheat and barley, rye and oats, and rice. And we discovered that we could actually plant lots of these things, and it was very, very good for us. Then we got to a point where we developed machines, and we found that we could get machines to actually row crop, broadacre crop, process sugarcane, process wheat, process all of these things. Sorry.
No, you're making a very good point, Ian, because remember in 2020 when they locked us down, I don't at any stage remember anybody in the medical or pharmaceutical industry recommending things like eating healthy and getting sunlight and spending time with family. In actual fact, what we got was the exact opposite. Get a vaccine, stay away from family members, stay indoors outside of the sun, and take these drugs. There was nothing
Yep.
in my view, that was healthy.
There was nothing in our country, your country, in the West, that said anything like look after your health. It was basically lockdown. And what happens with lockdowns? People drank alcohol, they got lazy, and many people thought it was great. It was a great holiday because in Australia we paid people to stay home.
Yes.
It really destroyed the fabric of our society, especially in Melbourne here, because in Melbourne we were the most locked down city in the world. And I put a Substack up recently about our lockdowns because it was over 270 odd days of lockdown, and it really destroyed a generation of children, in my opinion. But the chief health officer of Victoria, who worked with the Premier, who was known as Daniel Andrews, or Dictator Dan, as he was re-nicknamed, the chief health officer recently came out and said what we did was wrong, what we did was not scientific, what we did, we made big mistakes, and we have to learn from these mistakes. But he hasn't said sorry, and he hasn't been held accountable. And his mea culpa, Jeremy, his mea culpa is not accepted by myself or anybody else who I know in my profession because of the number of people maimed and killed as a result of his actions. So what they did was completely opposite to what they were doing in countries like El Salvador. I mean, El Salvador, the government over there was promoting it, it was advertising for people to go out into the sunshine and get some exercise. And they actually had advertisements with people enjoying themselves outdoors, mixing with one another. It was only a flu-like virus. It wasn't going to kill people. It was only going to kill those who are old or who had comorbidities. And the best thing for them would be to isolate them, test their vitamin D levels, up their vitamin D levels, and they probably would have resisted the virus. I mean, we did a study in 7 different tertiary institutions in Turkey because we couldn't do it in Australia. The study was funded by Australia's richest woman, a mining magnate, Gina Reinhardt. The study showed quite clearly that vitamin D protected you against COVID. The study also showed that if you had very low levels of vitamin D, you would die. The study also showed that if you're in intensive care and you received high doses of intravenous vitamin C, you were out of intensive care very, very quickly. In fact, you shouldn't have been even admitted to intensive care without giving a shot of vitamin C. Unbelievable that our health minister saw the results of that study and decided it was not enough and that he would continue going along with the vaccines, which tells me that there is something seriously wrong with the system, with the machine, with the corruption, with the cartels. We know where they are. We know who they are. And, of course, with the elites who are wanting control. But
however, Ian, I've got a bone to pick here because unless I've misunderstood you, a couple times you've brought up alcohol for all the wrong reasons. I live on a vineyard. I love my wine.
Good.
And you're gonna have a very, very tough time here convincing me to stop drinking. Listen, we all have vices, right? We all have vices. Wine and whiskey are my 2 vices. I love a glass of red.
Well, I wish I could take my computer camera and show you what's in my cupboard over here.
Okay, so you are giving me a lifeline here.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, part of the longevity of the people in Sardinia and the island of Greece, Icathia, that they drink, but they drink sensibly, and they enjoy.
But that's the key.
Huh?
Yeah, that's the key. Sensibly.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't have a winery, but I can tell you my cupboard has got some pretty good stuff in it. And I live in a house that's 140 years old, just over 140 years old. It's an old Victorian with a tower and a cellar, and but I'm telling patients, until you're better, no sugar, white flour products, alcohol, tea, coffee, chocolate, blah blah blah. It's the usual sort of blah blah blah. But the other important thing is to keep yourself young and healthy is a dog. So you write a prescription for a dog, okay? and the other thing is, you got to find the kid inside you. You got to find the kid inside you and be able to muck around and enjoy yourself. Yeah. Well, my wife lives in Queensland because Melbourne's too cold for her. But I mean, she's a Queenslander. That's where she prefers to live. But we sell it.
Wait. My Aussie geography is not very good. So New South Wales is where Sydney is. Is that correct? Queensland is above that. Is that right?
Queensland's above. There's Tasmania right down the bottom. The little triangle of island, Tasmania. Then Victoria was the state where Melbourne is the capital. Then there's New South Wales, which is the capital of Sydney, with the Coathanger Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. Then further north is Queensland, over the border.
Right. Okay.
Queensland,
I got you.
has got the Great Barrier Reef and the islands off.
Yes, that's right.
Coast.
I remember now.
Yeah. And we've got
outside my. I was going to say, just outside my studio here, I've got a wine rack that holds about 220 bottles of wine. So the wine discussion is going to be quite mute.
Okay, well, I'll take that. I have resveratrol every day. And not in the form of red wine, but if I do have a red wine, that's when I get my resveratrol. But it's got some great properties. It helps.
I actually heard that a glass of red a day is actually quite good for you in any event.
Yeah. I agree. But if you are trying to stop somebody's blood sugars from swinging, and
100%.
Yeah, thank you.
For sure.
It does stimulate your liver. And too much stimulation is a stress. So, I think you're probably able to handle other toxins better if you have a liver that's trained to detoxify. And, of course, alcohol has to be detoxified. And during that process, you're stimulating enzymes. And I think I won't say any more, Jeremy, because I don't want everybody to go off and start drinking heavily. But I take it.
I forget his name now. There was a cancer scientist who was on my show. Oh, I've gone blank now. I am so sorry.
Not Angus.
Anyway, he's written, I don't know, 125 papers already on science. On cancer being metabolic and not being genetic. And he argues something very similar to you, that basically reducing sugar, just as a general rule of thumb, is an excellent idea because various cancers tend to feed off sugars anyway.
Yeah. They go back to a primitive way of producing energy, and that's using too much sugar. So they love sugar. They also love salt because sodium and or chloride on the cell membrane stimulates the cell to want to divide. So salt is another one, but not many people will acknowledge that. And cancers don't like oxygen. Most cancers don't like high tension oxygen and heat. So what we do with cancer patients now is put them into hyperbaric oxygen chambers, and we also give them hypothermia, either in a chamber or localized hypothermia. So if you've got just one breast cancer and there's no evidence of spread, then we can put a plate on the breast cancer and heat the tumour, and the tumour cells go into a process of suiciding. They suicide, or we call it apoptosis. And it's another good way of helping. We also, with our cancer patients, give them high doses of intravenous vitamin C because it is carcinogenic to cancer cells, and it helps normal cells and the immune system function better. We put them into infrared or near-infrared light beds and the infrared light beds pick up put the infrared light into the circulating cells, and the circulating cancer cells are actually affected by the light. We can't get to the deep cells in the body, but the circulating cancer cells die off. And by reducing the circulating tumour cells, we can reduce the risk of metastases and spread. So there's a lot of interesting things happening with the biochemistry and metabolism in cancer. And as you said, if there's any genetic component of cancer, it's probably in less than 5% of cancers.
His name is Thomas Seyfried. It's just
Thomas Seyfried
now.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, and he's got a great book called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease.
Yeah.
Which, in a very interesting horseshoe, points back to diet.
Yeah.
And what basically we are what we eat.
Yeah. It's diet and it's micronutrients. I mean, back in the 1970s and early 80s, there was Gladys Block in the National Cancer Institute, and she said there's enough evidence that micronutrients, it's time for action in cancer care. But, there was some studies done and they designed the studies to fail. William Block, no, that was Gladys Block. William Blott in Hong Kong did a study in northwestern China where they have a very high incidence of gastrointestinal cancers from stomach down to anus. And they showed with 3 particular nutrients in blinded and controlled studies in 30,000 people that 3 nutrients could reduce the risk of or incidence of gastrointestinal cancers by 26%, which means 26 people out of 100 who expected to get cancer did not get the cancer. And those nutrients were beta-carotene, vitamin E, and selenium, the nutrient that I mentioned earlier. Just 3 nutrients. Now, if you look at that's not even looking at their diet. But do you think all of the oncology clinics and doctors around the world would be recommending something like that? No. It doesn't make money. It's not part of the business model.
Yeah, that's it right there, Ian. Doesn't make money.
No, doesn't make money. But
the whole COVID thing was about what makes money and what doesn't make money.
It was about making money, making people sick, putting them into hospital, and convincing everybody that the vaccinologists. And when I graduated, Jeremy, there was no such word as a vaccinologist, and the vaccinologists are now being trained in psychology to reduce this thing called vaccine hesitancy. It's a model.
Well, I mean that term makes me laugh. Vaccine hesitancy, as if like the default is not to be hesitant, and for some strange reason, you no longer want to have this toxic injection put into your arm, and now you're the problem because you're being hesitant.
Yeah, you're being hesitant. But the old guy who goes in for his 8th or 9th vaccine, he's the one who's approved by society. He is a hero. He's going in to protect everybody else. Well, he's lucky because he's so old, his immune system's not going to go into shock, and he's not going to die from the vaccines. Well, he probably will eventually get dementia or something like that. But that's the younger people whose immune systems are still alive and kicking that actually overreact.
Yes, and that's also the other thing. Have you noticed? About, I don't know, let's say 8 years ago, we could have had any discussion we wanted about vaccines and nobody really would have got offended or anything like that, right? Like now, we hear about people dying and weird things happening. And I don't know about you, but I immediately think, could it have been? But you can't say it out loud because you're not allowed to say it out loud anymore. Have you noticed?
Yep. Yeah. Well, if I'm told I'm not allowed to say something out loud, and I believe in saying something, then I will say it out very loud.
But I mean, people are dying, and we know exactly why, right? We know why,
Yeah.
and you still can't say it. And if you allude to it, people go, "Oh, how would you know?"
Yes.
There's no way of knowing it was the vaccine.
Well, there is a way of knowing it was the vaccine because of the numbers and the data that's been coming out. We can't argue against that. And as a doctor, if I give a drug or an injection to somebody and they react within a certain period of time, it's called the Bradford Hill evidence criteria. That if it's temporal, if it's within a certain period of time, and there is a known mechanism of action by which that particular medicine or drug or injection could have caused the patient to either get sick or die or have reaction, then logic says, well, it's probable that this caused the death or the serious adverse reaction. So I'm not going to do it anymore. When you get large populations where that's consistent, and the statistical analysis shows that the probabilities of it occurring were not by chance, then that's science. That's really hard science. And that's what's happening. Jeremy, we know that the sudden unexplained deaths are caused by the vaccine. We know that the turbo cancers are caused by the vaccines. We know that the Guillain-Barré syndrome caused by the vaccines. We know that the vaccines, before they were even released by Pfizer, caused, according to Pfizer's own records, 1,201 serious adverse effects. And it was still released under the Emergency Use Authorization, the EUA. And this is one of the greatest crimes against humanity.
Mm.
And I might take credit for being the first physician in the world to make the statement that the mRNA vaccines within the lipid nanoparticle are class 1 carcinogens.
Yeah, when you made that public statement, I think you got quite emotional also.
I did. That was on a stage in Perth in front of 3,000 people.
Mm.
And it was a very emotional night because it was a revelation of what's been going on, and I had a formal speech to give with slides, with PowerPoint slides. But before the event, there was a Meet the Speaker event, and the speaker, me being one of them, were exposed to politicians, to academics, and to patients. And the patients' stories I'd heard many times before, but I got on that stage and I thought, I can't do a formal slideshow on this. I have to speak from the heart. And that's, I could hear people in the front rows of the audience saying, come on, Doc, tell us everything. So I did.
Well, the world needs more professors like you, Ian. I'm just looking at the time. I think it's a wonderful way to end the conversation. How can my audience keep up with your work?
Well, please, I think you're great to be doing these sort of things, Jeremy. I'd like to keep in touch with you somehow.
Yeah, easy. Mm.
My work, I'm doing regular Substacks for the last few years. So you can subscribe to my Substacks, and they are free.
I've got it, yeah. It's ianbrighthope.substack.com.
That's it, yeah. And we've got the World of Wellness, which is a local organisation. It's a public organisation. There's a lot of my interviews on that, but it's 35 Aussie dollars a year for all the information. And we keep on.
That's nothing.
And the Line Council of Australia is our bigger public group. We represent 2 million Australians there. So, through my Substack, you can connect it with all of these other things. And I've just recently been asked to do a regular podcast, so I don't know how that's going to go because I'm not that technically au fait. Well, I'm pretty good on Zoom, but I'm a learner on Riverside.
Zoom's terrible.
Yeah, yeah.
Nah, the quality of Zoom is subpar.
Yeah. No, look, all the stuff that I've seen it on Riverside beats Zoom.
Yes. Well, with a surname like yours, Ian Brighthope, how can anybody go away from this conversation feeling down? Thank you for joining me in the trenches.